Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for stopping by our booth at Exploring Your Universe 2020. My name is Rucha. I'm the president of Brood and Beekeepers at UCLA, and today we'll be talking to you all about the biodiversity of bees. We're really excited to get to know you all through the chat and through the Q&A, so let's dive right in. Okay, so some materials that you'll need for today is something to draw on. So a piece of paper, an index card, just anything that you have nearby. You'll also need something to draw with. So you can use color pencils, crayons, markers, pens, or anything else. And then lastly, we are going to be going over some new information that many of you may not know before. So make sure to have your listening ears on and your thinking cap. All right, so to begin, let's share out. What are some words that come to mind when you think of bees? These can be any words. You can choose nouns, verbs, adjectives, even sound effects. Feel free to share it in the chat if you want to share your thoughts with everyone who's in attendance, or you can discuss it with the person next to you. So let's go ahead and take a few seconds to think about some words that come to mind when we think of bees.
So hopefully you've come up with some words that come to mind when you think of bees. Let's go over some words and see if they're the same as yours. Do you think of the word fuzzy? Maybe yellow, because bees are yellow. How about buzz, because that's the sound they make? Sting, they have a stinger. Hive, that's where they live. Maybe you've thought of that word. Plants, maybe? You see bees buzzing around plants a lot. Black, because they're also black. They're striped, right? Maybe you thought of honey. That's the food that we eat that comes from bees. Maybe you've associated bees with honey. How about flowers? You see bees poking their heads into flowers and collecting things from it? Pollen. Is that the thing they collect from flowers? And bug. Lastly, bees are bugs, right? So if you thought of all of these, you are correct. Bees do have these things. But one thing that's important to distinguish is that not all bees are the same. So although the words you thought of may apply to some bees, they definitely don't apply to all bees. Not all bees make honey. So only honeybees make honey. Native bees don't make honey. And what are native bees? We'll talk about that later. Not all bees sting. So a lot of times if you've met a bee or you run into a bee, you might be afraid of their stinger, but not all types of bees will sting you. Some don't have a stinger and some are quite docile, so they won't want to sting you anyways. Not all bees are black and yellow. So black and yellow striped bees are a very popular image of what bees are, but as you will see in the later slides, not all bees are black and yellow. Not all bees are the same size. So a lot of times when we see a hive of bees, we think that they're all the same size, but even within a hive, we'll have different sized bees. For example, the queen is much bigger. In other species of bees, they will be drastically different. Some species of bees will be very small, and some species of bees can be very big. Not all bees live in hives. So when we think of the bee's home, what do we think of? Usually it's a wooden box, right? Well, that's actually what humans built for bees to live in. But bees out in the wild, without any human influence, they, yes, can build their own hive that looks different in shape, but also some species of bees live in mud. They dig. Some species of bees are carpenters. They'll carve wood. Some species of bees love to live in little tunnels that they carve out of twig and stuff with leaves. So bees live in a lot of different places. And not all bees come from the same place. So some bees can originate from Asia, some bees can originate from Africa. The honeybee that we're most familiar with actually originates from Europe. And we have a lot of native bees here in North America that you might not know about.
So a lot of you may have had honeybees in mind when you were thinking about that question. So these are some different types of honeybees. The most common one that you'll see around Los Angeles and in the United States is the Western honeybee. But there are some other different kinds of honeybees as well, such as the giant honeybee and the Asiatic honeybee. However, a lot of people don't know that in addition to honeybees, there's another type of bee called the native bee. And so here we have some pictures of some native bees that you might see around, including the leafcutter bee, the valley carpenter bee, the yellow-faced bumblebee, mason bees, and sweat bees. So there are some big differences between native bees and honeybees. Honeybees, as we all know, are the honey champions. They make tons and tons of honey in their hive, and we can also use some of that honey in some of the food that we eat. If honeybees get scared or feel threatened, they will sting. In addition, because honeybees all have to work together to support each other, they have to collect a lot of pollen for the hive. And so a lot of the pollen that they find when they go to different flowers will stick to the bee and collect in something called a pollen basket. Lastly, honeybees live in a hive with other worker bees, drones, and the queen bee. On the other hand, native bees do not make honey. They're actually extremely gentle, so it takes a lot of poking around in their home for them to sting. They won't sting that often. They're also amazing at pollinating. They don't actually collect as much pollen as honeybees do, and because of that, all of the pollen just sticks to the native bee, and it can stick and also come off as the bee visits different flowers, which makes them really good at pollinating. And lastly, native bees don't live in hives. They're actually what's known as solitary bees, which means that they live by themselves. And so here are some examples of native bees and honeybees during their pollen collection when they're out and about looking for different flowers. So as you can see for the honeybees, all of them have these big yellow clumps stuck on their legs. So that's called a pollen basket. That's actually what the honeybee uses to collect a lot of pollen to be able to bring back to the hive. On the other hand, you can see that native bees are super, super fuzzy and they get completely covered in pollen. So instead of having a little area near their legs like the honeybees do, they just kind of roll around in the pollen, get super, super covered, and then travel around to different flowers because they only have to collect pollen for themselves. So we talked about how native bees live by themselves and how honeybees live in hives. But what does that actually look like on the inside? So we have a couple of videos here to show you all. You can see on the left, there's a video of a native bee in what's called their nest. So as you can see, this is a leaf cutter bee. So this bee has a little circle that she cut out of a leaf and that she's using to make her nest. You can already see some of the other leaves that she's already put inside her nest. And essentially what these bees do is collect different pieces of leaves to create a little pocket for their egg to be laid. And so the bee also goes to collect pollen from other flowers to help nourish the egg after the little bee hatches. So you can see this leafcutter bee, she's really packing in the leaves to make sure it's well sealed and that she's trying to see how this particular leaf piece will fit into the nest. And this bee apparently didn't like this leaf, so she's gonna kind of crawl out of the nest, the little nook that her nest is in, pull out the leaf, and probably go and find a different leaf to cut a hole out of to use for her nest. So that was what a native bee nest looks like on the inside. Now we'll take a look at what a honeybee hive looks like. So as you can see, this bee is communicating with its other honeybees around in the hive. It's doing something called the waggle dance to show all of the other bees where the pollen that that bee found can be found by the other bees as well. You can also see the pollen baskets that we talked about on that bee's legs, those little yellow clumps that are on both sides. And so this bee is telling all the other bees through the waggle dance how to find that pollen and bring it back to the hive.
So, how do honeybees communicate? Well, the favorite method of telling each other where the best plants with the best nectar is the waggle dance. What they do is they dance in a little figure eight. And if you don't know what a figure eight is, it's like an eight, and then you turn it on its side, and that's a figure eight. They point the middle, so this part right here, they point it towards the food. So if the food is that way, they will take their eight and turn it this way. So now this middle part is pointing toward the food. Now, the longer the waggle, so the waggle in the middle, where the part that's pointing towards the food source, the farther the distance away. So you see right now, the bee is just kind of waggling along in the middle before it goes to finish its loop. And everyone watching goes, oh, I know. So it waggled for this long in that direction, and that's where the food is. That's where I need to go. All right, say we want to find an item with our waggle dance now. I have something exactly like this, 2 seconds in that direction, okay? So now what I want to do is I want to face this direction and dance in this direction for 2 seconds, because that's how far away my item is, okay? Ready? 1, 2. So I've done the waggle part of my dance, and now I want to turn to the right to start making my figure 8, right? So we go like this. Now, facing forward again, we want to dance again. So, or if you don't want to dance, you can just wiggle forward for 2 seconds and then turn to your left. Now, see if your family can find whatever it is that you hid or whatever it is that you're pointing to. Your waggle dance can be used for anything. I used it for a doll. Bees use them for plants. Possibilities are endless. This will be a fun thing to try at home.
So next we're going to talk about plants that bees love. So all of these plants can actually be found in California. And as you can see, just from looking at the slide, there are a bunch of different color plants. And all of these flowers have a different shape as well. So there's a lot of variety in the plants that bees like. So starting on the upper left-hand side, you can see the California poppy, which is the nice orange color. And next to that, we have the blanket flower. So this flower is a daisy, and it's very popular with native bees, and it can be found in the valley. Next to that, we have the catmint, the nice purple. And on the far right, the yellow flower, we have the Cascade Creek. And this flower is actually very tough. So it tolerates drought, which means that when there's not a lot of rain and not a lot of water, the plant can still survive and it can still bloom and have flowers. And then on the bottom in the left, we have the Western redbud, which is this really bright pink color. And next to that, we have the Russian sage. So the Russian sage is visited by both native bees and honeybees. And this plant actually survives really well in the heat. So since California is really hot, this plant will actually do really well and still provides food for the bees. And finally, we have Freecart's aster on the bottom right, which is like the daisy-like purple flower.
Thank you all so much for listening. So now we're going to draw what you learned. So we do have some examples here from other students and other kids who drew what they learned from a similar presentation, but you can feel free to draw whatever you'd like. A lot of people will draw their favorite bee from the presentation. You can also draw how you can help bees, and you can draw different types of bees if you would like. Feel free to get really creative with this. This is your chance to show everybody what you learned. And so the Q&A will be coming up very soon, and we're really excited to see everything that you all drew. But in the meantime, you can also check out our website, Bruin Beekeepers at UCLA, for more information about our upcoming events and other educational resources about bees if you're curious. And so big thank you from the Bruin Beekeepers at UCLA. We're really excited to get to talk to you all during the Q&A, and we're really, really thankful that you all came out to check out our booth. See you soon.